The Trumpet Daily with Stephen Flurry.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show. Lots to get to on today's program. We've got some fascinating sound bites lined up, so you'll want to stay tuned for that, in addition to all the other things that we'll bring to you on this program. We'll talk a little bit later about the British elections coming up on December the 12th and some of the articles coming out over here in the UK about Jeremy Corbyn and whether or not he can win this election against Boris Johnson. Those are the two that it basically comes down to as far as the Prime Minister's office is concerned. And then if we have time, we've got quite a lot packed into this first segment, but if we have time, we'll look into the book of 1 Kings. We've been talking in recent programs about the prophets, Elijah and Elisha. And we'll shift over to one of the kings, Jeroboam. We have a lot to say about the Jeroboam end, of course, Jeroboam and prophecy. But just in looking back at some of the history from 1 Kings 11 and chapter 12 as well, it really does inform us of a lot of detail that and parallels, too, that you can see aligning perfectly with some of the events we see happening in the United States and even Great Britain today. Well, on Tuesday's program, you'll recall, if you heard that one, that I referred to the seismic shift that's happening in the federal judiciary because of all of these judges that President Trump is getting confirmed. We're into the hundreds now, as I covered on that program. And, of course, that article I went from or quoted from talked about how the Democrats and their allies in the media, they're all distracted with their impeachment efforts and other things to bring down this president. And meanwhile, you see the agenda for Donald Trump just continually marching forward. Yesterday at the White House, the president had a few things to say about all of these judicial confirmations. This is clip one.
But we will have confirmed, as I said, 112 judges to the federal district courts, 44 judges to the federal circuit courts, and 2 outstanding judges to the United States Supreme Court. And that number is rapidly rising. Now, 1 out of every 4 circuit judges currently on the bench was appointed by this administration, and that number has now exceeded that by quite a bit. No president in history has confirmed as many circuit court judges, even close, not even close, in such a short period of time. The average age of my newly appointed circuit court judges is less than 50. A young, smart, that's 10 years younger than President Obama's nominees. The pace of appointments is only accelerating. It's going very quickly.
That's President Trump yesterday in the White House. So we're talking about not just dramatic change in the federal judiciary, but change that's going to be around for a long time. These are young judges as well, 10 years younger than the ones President Obama nominated on average. This is a dramatic transformation, and it's happened just in 3 years. In fact, it's accelerating, notably, just this year. Here's a little bit more from President Trump yesterday, clip 2.
But we're on track to have more judges confirmed this year than in the prior 2 years combined for us, and will be a record in history, the number of judges that we're getting in just a short period of time. Once all pending nominations are confirmed, I will have appointed about 219 judges, and that number will go up very substantially from that.
The number's just going to continue to go up. Supposing he gets reelected next year, where will we be 2 or 3 years from now? How will the Supreme Court look? He's already made 2 appointments there. And people on the Democratic side of the aisle, they're looking very closely at the health of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She, of course, is radically left-wing. What if he makes another? What if there's another confirmation for the Supreme Court, replacing one of those liberal justices? My father, earlier this year, this was January 2019, you Trumpet subscribers will remember the article, Is America's Supreme Court in Bible Prophecy? Is the U.S. Supreme Court in Bible Prophecy? That was the title of the article back in January, just this year, 10, 11 months ago, at thetrumpet.com or the Trumpet magazine. And in that article, he referred to these verses in Amos 7. Amos 7 and verse 12 says, "O you seer, go, flee you away into the land of Judah," it says, "and there eat bread, and prophesy there, but prophesy not again unto or any more at Bethel." He likens that to a capital city. For Bethel, the capital city, it is the king's chapel, and it is the king's court. So we've talked before about the king's chapel, talking about, a place of worship, and how that this Jeroboam leader, this prophecy for a Jeroboam leader in the end time, how there's going to be a lot of traditional Christians who look to this leader as their own. But that verse also talks about not just the king's chapel, but the king's court. In the King James Version, there in the margin, if you have a wide margin Bible, it says the house of the kingdom. The house of this kingdom. Wycliffe translates it, house of the realm. This is what my father had to say in that January article. He says this is not a religious entity. It's so he has the religious following, the king's chapel, but then it refers to the house of the kingdom. And my father says it's not a religious entity. It's something else, the nation's house. It's not something that is following Jeroboam, yet it favors him. It is helping him in some way. Well, what could this be referring to prophetically? My father says, I believe this non-religious entity, the kingdom's house, is referring to the U.S. Supreme Court. This court was designed to guard the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. In many ways, the Supreme Court is over the whole nation. Even the president is subject to it, which is exactly the type of entity that the house of the kingdom is referring to. That's all taken from the January issue of the Trumpet magazine. And so he's gaining strength because of the support coming from the federal judiciary, the Supreme Court, most especially. But as you're seeing from these numbers, the numbers the president was talking about yesterday in the White House, it's filtering on down to the local level as well. And even though, as that article I mentioned on Tuesday, even though Democrats and the major media, they're caught up with a lot of other stories, you can be sure that they're taking note of this forward progress for the Trump administration, because they rely on the courts to carry out their agenda when it's not supported by a majority of Americans. They're watching and they're doing everything that they can to fight, to resist. As I covered earlier this week, the resistance. Here's what the president had to say about his opponents. Clip 3.
But the more gains we make, the more aggressive the hard left has become. I probably shouldn't even be making this speech right now. I'm just driving them crazy.
He's driving them crazy because they need these activist judges in federal courts in order to slow down the president's agenda. And you see it from time to time with the headlines, these local federal judges that are stopping, particularly with respect to border security, trying to stop President Trump. He refers to that also yesterday, or he did yesterday, clip 4.
But one of their favorite new tactics is the nationwide injunction. This very destructive practice enables any one of 673 district judges to single-handedly invalidate critical executive actions and stop the enforcement of duly enacted law. We've had it many times, especially when it comes to our border.
Especially with respect to border security. So these district judges invalidating actions taken by this duly elected president. If they can't stop it on election day, then they try to stop it with the courts, and they pull out all the stops at the local level, and then when it comes to a Supreme Court nominee, well, we saw what happened with that last year. My father, in the November-December issue last year, 2018, the one on the Kavanaugh hearings, revealing America's lawless spirit. So this would have been the issue right before the issue where it had the Supreme Court article, the Supreme Court in prophecy. My father said in November last year, God is saving Israel temporarily, and if the 2016 election had gone the other way, I'm convinced the nation would already be finished. And in this latest battle, if Republicans had not confirmed Kavanaugh, to me, that would have indicated that we had already seen the last vestige of resistance to the left extinguished. Surely it would have meant an ideological tie on the Supreme Court. 4 justices on the one side and 4 on the other for years to come, which means the lower court decisions stand. See, the administration now has somewhat of a safety valve in that if it gets stopped, his agenda gets stopped or slowed down on the district level, well, it can always work its way up to the Supreme Court. And there, one would think anyway, the Trump administration would have an advantage. It says here, that plays into the left's hands. If it was a 4-4 tie, in other words, that plays into the left's hands, at least until they can put more activist judges on the court. That was their plan. But God upset their plan. That's taken from the November 2018 Trumpet. God upset their plan. Their goal is to control the courts. So my father writes that following the Kavanaugh circus in October of last year. He writes that in the November Trumpet, and then he follows that up in January 2019. Is the Supreme Court, America's Supreme Court, is that in Bible prophecy? Let me switch back to that one, January 2019. It says, the process to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court was a hard-fought battle in America. Why? Because his appointment makes the court more conservative for the foreseeable future, a situation liberals were desperate to prevent. They were desperate. And you saw it in the way that they went after him. I just mentioned on yesterday's program, they don't care if you're a left-wing donor and you're a pedophile or a predator, they'll try to cover that up. And then you have someone with impeccable credentials, and they'll try to destroy you. They'll try to say you're a predator, a sexual predator. We saw how that went down just last year. They're desperate to prevent conservatives from gaining an advantage in the courts. My father continued, this means President Donald Trump will likely put 1 or 2 more justices. Well, he's talking in this article about you had all the Brett Kavanaugh circus, and then just soon after that, during the midterms, the Republicans, of course, sustained some losses in the House, but they actually gained more seats in the Senate. And the Senate is where these judicial nominees are confirmed. So the president actually increased his strength, his advantage in the Senate during those midterm elections last November. So my father says, this means President Donald Trump will likely put 1 or 2 more justices on the court, making it even more conservative. This terrifies liberals even more. He says, there's a Bible prophecy that I believe could indicate another effect of this trend in the Supreme Court. I have only come to understand it recently, and it's making me watch the court closely. So he's referring there to that prophecy, Amos 7. He talked about it in the November-December issue of the Trumpet, and then again in January of this year. Now, going back to some of the comments yesterday in the White House, he had certain senators from the Judiciary Committee there, Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham. And at one point during the ceremony, he asked for the Senator Lindsey Graham, to come up and to make a few comments. And he had this to say about the Kavanaugh hearing a year ago, clip 5.
But one thing I want to say, about President Trump. The defining moment of your presidency for me was the Kavanaugh hearing. This room would be empty if we had failed Brett Kavanaugh. Brett Kavanaugh lived a life we should all be proud of. He worked hard, and the way he was treated was the worst experience I've had in politics. A lot of people would have pulled the plug on him. Mr. President, thank you for not pulling the plug.
That's Lindsey Graham yesterday saying that for him, the defining moment of President Trump's presidency was backing Brett Kavanaugh, not pulling the plug on him. Any other politician, any other Republican that ran against Donald Trump probably would have pulled the plug after all of that intimidation, after the onslaught from the Democratic media machine and all of the lies, the way that they came forward with those scurrilous accusations. It would have been easy to bow to the pressure, to withdraw the nomination, and then to go for a safer, more liberal option. And he didn't do it. He stood behind his nominee. Now, notice what my father said. This is the January issue of the Trumpet. He says, I believe this prophetic account in Amos 7 implies that there is a conservative advantage in the Supreme Court, one that favors Jeroboam. The confirmation of Justice Kavanaugh could work to help fulfill this prophecy. And then listen to this. You talk about getting some special prophetic insight. He says, I believe Mr. Kavanaugh's confirmation indicates God will likely see that President Trump has a second term. Likely. He didn't say for sure, but it sure seems like this is the way it's going to be lining up over the next 12 months. And the Kavanaugh confirmation, it really did reveal a lot. Lindsey Graham says it's a defining moment of the Trump presidency. A lot of other people would have pulled the plug on him, but he didn't. He stood behind him, and now he's got that slight advantage in the Supreme Court, and you see it filtering on down, even to the district levels. And then you project ahead. What will it be like, these courts? What will they be like a year or two or maybe 3 or 4 years from now? My father wrote more recently, this is in Can President Trump Get Control of His Own Divided Government? He says, biblical prophecy indicates that there will be something of a turnaround, though, and that President Trump will actually gain more control of these government agencies that have been working to unseat him. It says, for America to be saved, so we know about the temporary saving, or temporary salvation, if you could call it that. It says those agencies need to be cleaned up and made to abide by the rules. If they're driven by ideology rather than the Constitution and the law, then they will quickly turn America into a tyrannical state. That is what happens without government to implement the law, and that's what America was close to experiencing. But something happened to stop that, at least temporarily. And then in this same article, my father, you can see it on the YouTube stream there, the next subhead says, the kingdom's court. He refers again to this prophecy in Amos chapter 7 and the fact that a Jeroboam administration is going to temporarily save Israel. And for that to happen, he needs the law, the supreme law of the land on his side. And so he needs an advantage in the federal judiciary. He needs that power in order to clean things up. You think about the radical left. God really is, like my father said earlier, God really is upsetting their plans. It seems every time they lash out at this president or attack his administration, that God upsets them somehow. Here they've been carrying on with all of these interviews in the basement of the Capitol. And, well, I guess now it's supposed to come more out into the open. This was Adam Schiff yesterday announcing that the impeachment hearings The official ones would begin next week. This is clip 6.
I want to let you know, as you may know already, that we will begin our open hearings in the impeachment inquiry next week. We will be beginning with the testimony of Ambassador Taylor and Ambassador Kent on Wednesday, and we will have Ambassador Yovanovitch testify on Friday. These will be the first of the open hearings. And I think you will see throughout the course of the testimony, not only their testimony, but many others, the most important facts are largely not contested.
I think the building collapsed in the middle of his statement there. It looked like he was giving his statement in a parking garage or something. In any event, he's talking about the most important facts. They're all what did he say? Not contested. And of course, the most important fact in all of this is that the transcript is there for everyone to see. Everyone can read the conversation between the President of the United States and the President of Ukraine. And both leaders agree there was no quid pro quo. Well, in fact, they've moved on from that because they can't prove it. Now they're throwing out things like extortion. Well, he's guilty of extortion. And look at all these witnesses coming forward. They're all Democratic operatives. Same with the whistleblower. As we went through just last week, I think it was. But they're throwing everything into this basket. This is all that they have. Impeachment. Impeachment. They were talking about it from the very beginning. They were talking about it in 2016. This was the insurance policy. And they've already swung and missed with the Mueller investigation. So now it's this. The whistleblower who comes forward, and wouldn't you know, just a few hours after Schiff makes his statement yesterday, we learn about the whistleblower's lawyer, his attorney, direct from his Twitter feed, which said that the coup has started. And when did he say this? He said it within days of the Trump inauguration. You can't make this stuff up. This is from Fox News. Mark Zaid, one of the attorneys representing the intelligence community whistleblower at the center of the Democrats' ongoing impeachment inquiry, tweeted conspicuously in January 2017 that a coup has started and that impeachment will follow ultimately. This is the lawyer for the whistleblower. Going back to this story from what should have been August of 2019, because the phone call, if it's all about Ukraine, the phone call was in July. Then you had the whistleblower meet secretively with Adam Schiff. That's illegal, by the way. And it's all in cahoots with this lawyer, this team, this firm that was tweeting out things 2.5 years ago. The coup has started. The coup has started. It's going to lead to impeachment. This attorney representing the whistleblower, he tweeted this: I predict CNN will play a key role in Donald Trump not finishing out his full term as president. Well, he's certainly right about CNN playing a key role in trying to take down this president. But here's the attorney for the whistleblower, and it turns out he's just another Democratic activist. And he puts himself out there like he's a lawyer, and he's represented clients on both sides of the aisle, so he's not politically biased or motivated at all. He was as desperate as Peter Strzok to take down this president. Still is. He's like John Brennan. He's been calling for whistleblowers to come forward. He wants to represent them. He'll do it for discounted rates, maybe pro bono. Who knows? It says, amid a slew of impeachment-related posts, Zaid assured his Twitter followers that as one falls, 2 more will take their place, apparently referring to Trump administration employees who defy the White House. Oh, okay, well, he can fire them, but we'll put 2 more in their place. You talk about the deep state. They know. They've got all kinds of operatives in the administrative state, in the CIA, in the State Department, in the FBI, in some cases in the White House. Well, listen to this. This is from that Fox News piece. It says the whistleblower's lawyer gave away the game, the Trump campaign's communications director Tim Murtaugh said. It was always the Democrats' plan to stage a coup and impeach President Trump, and all they ever needed was the right scheme. So, of course, the latest scheme is Ukraine, and if it's not quid pro quo, it's extortion. We know he needs to be out. The lawyer said so just days after the inauguration when President Trump hadn't done anything. Certainly not anything illegal. And everything that the Mueller report confirmed shows that he wasn't doing anything before he became president either. If it's impeachment, what is it to be impeached for? Where are the articles of impeachment? Where's the illegal activity? Where are the high crimes and misdemeanors? Where are the treasonous acts? It says here, they whiffed on Mueller, so now they've settled on the perfectly fine Ukraine phone call. This proves, it says, that this was orchestrated from the beginning. Yes, indeed, it's all been orchestrated from the very beginning. And this attorney's Twitter feed proves it. It proves it. I'm not a Trump fan, Zaid said on a podcast last year. I go out of my way on Twitter to say resistance. It's not a resistance against the GOP or a Republican. I don't think Trump is a Republican, quite frankly. So it's just all a matter of taking down Donald Trump. And he admitted it. On the podcast last year, he admitted it on his Twitter feed. Zaid also had something of an open casting call for whistleblowers on Twitter as Trump took office, writing that CIA employees should come to his law firm to lawfully challenge the new president. Hey, if you're working in the CIA, please see me at my law firm. Let's challenge this president. Let's use the courts where we can. Who knows? We might get an activist judge. John Brennan made a similar call. This article further on says, meanwhile, Democrats on Wednesday released a transcript of testimony from U.S. diplomat Bill Taylor in which he claimed to have a clear understanding that Trump wanted to leverage military aid to Ukraine in return for investigations that could benefit him politically, while acknowledging he didn't have firsthand knowledge of what was in the president's mind. So here's Bill Taylor. This is all happening yesterday. This is their latest, greatest witness, Bill Taylor, who's working on second or third or fourth hand knowledge. He's not even directly involved. I think the president, I don't know if it was with Taylor or some other witness, he said, how come all these witnesses keep coming forward with all this insider knowledge and I've never heard of them? Here he acknowledged that he didn't know what was going on in the president's mind. And this is their evidence, supposedly. And now Adam Schiff makes the big announcement. Yeah, the investigation, it's going to be an open investigation next week. And we've got some big plans. And then that very day, someone looks back a few years into the attorney for the whistleblower, his Twitter feed. And wouldn't you know it, you see the coup hiding there in plain sight. As conspicuous as ever, the coup has started. It's leading to impeachment. Last night, the president was in Louisiana, another campaign rally, and he had just received news before the campaign of this attorney's Twitter feed and what he had said back at the early part of 2017. And here's what the president responded with, clip 7.
Okay, they just handed me this story. Coup has started, whistleblower's attorney said in 2017. You know when that was? That was a long time ago. It's all a hoax. They say January 2017, a coup
has started, and the impeachment will follow. Ultimately, it's all a hoax. It's a scam. And you know who helps them? These people right back here, the media. And then it said, oops, the light's going to go off. The CNN light is going to go off. It said, from the lawyer, a sleazeball. It said, I predict at CNN will play a key role in @real Donald Trump not finishing out his first term. Can you believe this? This is a whole, and this was done a long time ago. Then he goes, as one falls, two more will take their place, referring to outgoing Trump administration employees.
That's President Trump last night exposing this hoax for what it is. All of this fake news, all the sleaze in the media. It is sleaze. There's no honesty. They're not honest, objective seekers of the truth. Their goal is to spread lies about a president they hate, or to conceal the truth in the case of the whistleblower or this lawyer. No wonder they don't want to reveal the name of the whistleblower, even though everybody knows the name. It's Eric Caramella. John Brennan sent him to the White House. He worked for Susan Rice. He advised Joe Biden on the Ukrainian policy. He invited the DNC operative, Alexandra Chalupa, to the NSC. And then he had all that illegal coordination with Adam Schiff. This is their whistleblower. And on the one side, you've got, what was the story the other day or last week? Real Clear Politics, I think it was, that revealed the name of this so-called whistleblower. Donald Trump Jr. tweeted it out yesterday. So everybody, it's an open secret. But here you have the major media, and they're still playing the game. Well, we can't reveal it. We can't reveal his name. We've got to protect him. It's for the safety of him and his family. In fact, they don't want his bias to be revealed. It's so obvious that this is just an extension of John Brennan. It's so obvious that it's politically motivated. And the media, they don't want you to know this. So they're trying to conceal it still. At least from people who only get their news from CNN or MSNBC. It's pretty amazing. All that they have, again, is impeachment and lies. Listen to what Don Lemon had to say. He's at CNN. This is what he said last night while the president was speaking in Louisiana. Clip 8.
We're getting reports that large numbers of people are leaving the rally as the president keeps talking.
Right. Everybody is leaving. Nobody wants to listen to President Trump. And here it's one city after another where people are standing outside in line. People are watching the event on a big screen because they can't fit inside. And here's a commentator at CNN saying that he's getting reports that large numbers of people are leaving the rally, even as the president's speaking. Well, look at your screen when you see video clips. You can see them on this program, in fact, if you're watching the YouTube stream. The truth of it is, God is upsetting their plans. God is upsetting their plans every step of the way, at least for the length of this temporary resurgence. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily radio show. When we come back, we'll talk about the upcoming, we'll tie Ephraim together with this Jeroboam prophecy, looking at the book of Hosea, and then comment on the upcoming elections to take place here in the UK in the month of December. We'll be right back.
This is KPCG FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily.
To America's founding fathers, character meant everything to the success of the nation and its leadership. The Constitution was based upon the fundamental principles of religion and morality. These were the primary building blocks of the American nation. George Washington said, "The foundations of our national policy will be laid in the pure and immutable principles of private morality." Character was no minor issue to America's first president. He regarded it as the basis of national policy. Where did the Founding Fathers develop these ideas? Many of these principles stemmed from the Holy Scriptures. The Bible provided early Americans with the instruction and guidance of how to properly govern one's life. These beliefs helped build a nation of strong families and upright leaders. Today, America has dismissed the Bible as the foundation of developing righteous character. Men now leave it to themselves to determine right from wrong. Where has the rejection of biblically based principles led this nation? There is a cause for these effects. To understand the course of events that have led this nation to its current state, visit thetrumpet.com and click on the Literature tab to request our free booklet, Character in Crisis.
From the Philadelphia Church of God campus in Edstone, England, this is the Trumpet Daily program with Stephen Flurry.
On this side of the pond, Boris Johnson is certainly facing his share of resistance from the radical left. And when you think about the radical left, Jeremy Corbyn leading that movement, there's some frightening positions that radical left has, just like in the United States. And Hosea 5 indicates that Ephraim's going to go the way of Jeroboam. So the Bible does indicate that the two are sort of part of this resurgence together. I even noticed, I don't know when this change took place, but when flying back to Heathrow on Monday, typically you had all of the European passports because of the EU that would go through a faster track just to get into the country. And then everybody else outside the EU, including the United States, would generally, not always, sometimes the lines, I guess, could vary. But a lot of times I'd get into the country from traveling abroad and have to go into a longer line for the U.S. or whatever. This is just one person's observation. I'm not suggesting anything dramatic has happened based upon a huge survey I've taken. But this time around, coming into Heathrow, it's basically the British passports and then U.S., Canada, the Ephraimitish countries. And then all the other passports were in the other line. So I thought that was interesting. But we've talked before with respect to trade and so on, how that here's the President of the United States just itching to solidify a trade deal with Britain, telling Britain, look, just get out of the EU. And join us, in other words. Well, this prophecy in Hosea 5, verse 11, it says, Ephraim is oppressed and broken in judgment. We know it's not going to end well for either of our countries. Ephraim's oppressed and broken in judgment because he willingly walked after the commandment. And as my father's explained before, it means there that he's walked after the commandment of Jeroboam. He's following after Jeroboam. And it's not going to end well for either nation. Verse 12 says, Therefore will I be unto Ephraim as a moth, and to the house of Judah as rottenness. It won't end well for Judah either. In the Hosea booklet, my father says, people only see prosperity, glitter, and glamour. Most people today are only living for the next exciting entertainment, even though the signs of disaster are there. So there's a sickness deep within our nations. It runs from head to toe, as Isaiah 1 brings out. But before that death, so to speak, there is, as we covered in the first segment, a temporary resurgence. So perhaps God will back Boris Johnson all the more as we approach those elections. There have been quite a few newspaper articles and such about what a Jeremy Corbyn government would look like. And there's commentators, too, saying how that this campaign season, it's one of the most uncertain election seasons in Britain's history. You've got Brexit as a backdrop, and quite a few people who just don't know what will happen. Now, polls indicate that Boris Johnson will win, but they're also not ruling out a surprise victory from Jeremy Corbyn, which, as I say, just looking at the policies, it ought to raise levels of concern in the minds of most Britons. Just look at some of the things that he said about the Jews, for example. The Jews, one poll found that 7% of the Jews said they would consider voting Labour. Only 7%. The Jews here in Britain, they're terrified at the thought of a Corbyn administration. And some of these columns that we had in the news stack this morning quotes Jewish citizens here in the UK, or citizens of the UK who are Jews. It says, this is by far the biggest challenge to the UK Jewish community of all our lifetimes, says one. Another one says, I'm waking up with a sense of doom every day. Fear is what it is. Fear and dread mixed with a sense of disbelief that this could be happening in my lifetime. This is the thought, again, of Jeremy Corbyn winning in December. Another one says, I feel utterly betrayed by the country I grew up in that used to feel safe. My father fled from Austria in 1941. Deep in my heart, I always felt the people around me would have my back. I have now lost that trust. These are Jews here in the UK who are thinking, how could Jeremy Corbyn even be where he is today? Given some of the things he said, given some of the policies he's put in place. The Jewish Chronicle had a front page article recently appealing to non-Jews for help to keep Mr. Corbyn out of office. They're saying, look, we need your help here. Listen to what he's saying. This article says the vast majority of British Jews consider Jeremy Corbyn to be an anti-Semite. In the most recent poll last month, the figure was 87%. So 87% of Jews consider Corbyn to be an anti-Semite. It says throughout his career, he has allied with and supported anti-Semites. He has described organizations like Hamas, whose founding charter commits it to the extermination of every Jew on the planet, as his friends. Jeremy Corbyn calls Hamas his friends. He's laid a wreath to honor terrorists who have murdered Jews. He's friends with them. He negotiates with them. He wants to sit down with them, these terrorists who hate Jews. It says, yet while we see all this, we also see an election being fought in which anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, inspired by its leader, is mentioned only occasionally as an afterthought. And it talks about all these other issues on the minds of the British people, and says, well, that's important too. But look, we should consider some of the things this man has said and worry. That's what this Jewish Chronicle concludes. Here in Britain, by the way, there's this former Labour MP. This is someone who was in the Labour Party for decades, I think. His name is Ian Austin. And he's come out and encouraged British citizens to vote Tory, to vote for Conservatives. Because the thought of Jeremy Corbyn being Prime Minister, it frightens this man. Listen to what he said in an interview recently, clip 9.
I was an advisor to the last Labour government. I've been a Member of Parliament for 14 years. I was a government minister. So for the Labour Party has been my life. And for me to do something like this, this is a massive step. It's a big question for me. But this is the choice the British people are going to have to make. And I just think that Jeremy Corbyn is unfit to lead Britain.
He's not fit to lead Britain. This from a long-time member of the Labor Party. Imagine if a close confidant of let's say, Bill Clinton came out and said, look, you better vote for Donald Trump because Elizabeth Warren or whoever's going to win the Democratic ticket next year, because they're too radical. They're too far left. They're too extreme. That's basically what you're seeing here. Notice what the former MP, Ian Austin, went on to say, clip 10.
He and the people around him always seemed to back our country's enemies, whether that was supporting the IRA at the height of the Troubles, or describing Hamas and Hezbollah as his friends, or when Putin sends hitmen to murder people in the streets of Britain, Jeremy Corbyn parrots the Kremlin line. I think this is completely unacceptable. I don't think he loves our country in the end. I think their economic policies would deter investment, put businesses and jobs at risk. And I think their Brexit policy is completely ridiculous. I regard myself as decent, traditional, mainstream, patriotic Labour. And I think decent Labour voters, mainstream Labour voters, should lend the Tories their vote at this election.
A long-time, a traditionalist Labour Party member. And he says there's going to be others like me out there who are not going to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. We'll see, I guess, what happens on December the 12th. But back to this article from the Jewish Chronicle. It says some of the things he's done, the racist statements that he's made, it should get our attention. It says if this man is chosen as our next prime minister, the message will be stark that our dismay that he could ever be elevated to a prominent role in British politics and our fears of where that will lead are irrelevant. It says, finally, we believe that the overwhelming majority of British people abhor racism. We ask only that when you cast your vote, you act on that. Act on that. If you abhor racism, then don't vote Labour. Don't vote for Jeremy Corbyn, says this former Labour MP. Speaking of racism, listen to what he had to say about racism, this former Labour MP, Ian Austin, clip 11.
I mean, I joined the Labour Party as a teenager to fight racism, and I can't believe that I had to leave it to fight racism as well. And I think what's happened to the Labour Party is absolutely heartbreaking. I don't think people could have believed. I mean, look, I think under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, they've taken what was a mainstream political party and they've turned it into something completely different, way out on the fringes of British politics. I think Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, people like this, have spent their entire time on the fringes of British politics.
Way out on the fringes of British politics. And you could say the same thing about what's happening to the Democratic Party in the United States as well. All of these far left policies. Corbyn, of course, wants to increase spending massively. He's got all of these environmental regulations that he wants to put in place. I heard on the radio just yesterday when I was in the car, I think it was probably his group. It's a far left group that wants to, or is proposing something like $90 billion, borrowing it for environmental policies, just going deeper and deeper into debt so that Britain can go green. He wants the government to take over private companies. In some cases, just taking the company away from the owners. Alistair Heath, he wrote at the Telegraph, he encouraged Middle England to wake up and said how that a Corbyn administration would be a catastrophe. He writes, forget about Project Fear or all of the usual hysterical warnings about the state of the world. A Labour victory, most likely at the head of the left-wing coalition, would be the real deal, a genuine catastrophe, a despicable stench of anti-Semitism, the oldest of hatreds, oozes from the party's pores. It just oozes from this party. It says Labour under Corbyn, John McDonnell, and whichever hard left figures eventually replace them, would be a calamity for our country. The worst, most destructive government of the modern era. It says this election is thus a Manichaean struggle, capitalism versus a nasty, vicious, prejudiced form of bureaucratic socialism. Leave versus remain, day versus night. Yes, a Manichaean struggle, as he says there. He says, finally, this is at the Telegraph, a raft of businesses would be nationalized outright, potentially at an unfair price determined by politicians, not the market, triggering capital flight from the UK. The green push would be so extreme that swaths of industry would soon be bankrupted. But even more dangerous is the proposal to require all firms employing over 250 people to transfer 10% of their shares into a state fund over a decade. Legalized theft on a grand scale, which may require capital controls to avoid a complete market meltdown. As I say, this scenario is so frightening to some that even a former labor minister is coming out, going on interview after interview to tell people in Britain, look, don't vote for Jeremy Corbyn. During one exchange on radio, this is the radio host basically saying, okay, let me make sure I got this right. You want them to vote conservative? This is clip 12.
You, someone who, let's be honest, used to pick up the phone to this programme and have the odd shout occasionally when you were Gordon Brown's press secretary. Let's be clear, you are telling people to vote Conservative, to vote for Boris Johnson.
I am. I think this is the choice the country faces.
Let me be clear. That's what I'm doing. This is the choice that the country faces. Those elections, as I said at the top of the show, those are coming up on December 12th. So lots and lots going on in the news on both sides of the pond. A real knockdown, drag-out struggle, a fight. And of course, as I covered earlier this week, in the end, it's not going to bode well for either country because the sickness is spreading, the division, the strife, the hatred. But God, you can see God's hand, though, in this temporary resurgence. You can see God actively involved in these events as they unfold. Here he is, temporarily saving our nations for the work's sake, so that his work can finish. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily radio show. If you'd like to leave us some feedback, don't forget about the red button on the TDRS page there at the trumpet.com website. If you can find your way over to the radio page, you can click on the red button and submit some audio feedback. If you'd like to type away, you can, of course, send emails to td@kpcg.fm. We thank you for joining us on today's program, and we'll see you again tomorrow.